Welcome, everybody. How are you guys doing? So good to see some familiar names joining us. Normally, people take a couple of minutes to join the webinar. So we will be starting very, very shortly. For those of you who don't know me, I'm 𝐬𝐬𝐻, Community Manager at the Project Finance Institute. So anything to do with any of our upcoming events, courses that we provide, community activities, always feel free to either send me a direct message via the platform or an email should be fine as well. So today we have Joel Seendam with us from Perfect Excel. I've known Joel for a while now, and I can say that what he's gonna review today and show you guys, it's pretty interesting and sophisticated, and I can't wait to hear what all of you think about it. But the focus will be on model review and some of the technologies, external technologies that we can use to support these processes. Great to see you joining from different parts in the world. So you can see Joe is joining us from the Netherlands. We have people from West Africa, Nigeria, Germany, Canada. That's really, really great to see a global audience. Ireland, thank you guys for joining us. Joe, whenever you're ready, feel free to give everybody a slightly longer introduction about who you are and what you guys do, and we can begin. You may need to.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for the introduction, 𝐬𝐬𝐻. I'm excited to be able to speak to you all today, talk a little bit about the process of auditing models and how that process can be made simpler through using external technologies. My background is I work for a company called Perfect Excel that works to just help end users create better spreadsheets, specifically Excel models, in a variety of different ways. I've been working with the company for over 5 years now, but we've existed for over 10 years already. So it's been a long time, but I do a lot of these kinds of presentations, attending conferences. I was just at the European Spreadsheet Risk Interest Group in London 2 weeks ago as well. So there's some inspiration in my presentation as well, drawn from that. So yeah, and anybody that has any questions, please throw it in the chat. I believe 𝐬𝐬𝐻 will keep her eyes on the chat as well. So if there's any questions, don't be afraid to interrupt or pop in. More than happy to receive any questions. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation as a little bit of a backbone for me to talk over. Just pull this up. Hopefully you guys can see all that okay. I just learned about this technology today from 𝐬𝐬𝐻 that I'm able to present my face over the main screen. Great, perfect. Yeah. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about like model review tools, specifically tools you can use to audit and review models. I guess a little bit more specifically, we'll be looking at how auditing Excel files or Excel models becomes easier with certain external tooling, right? Just a really quick overview of what we'll be trying to cover in this session. I think it's really important before we dive into like specifically the tooling or software that's available. Sorry, I just saw a message in the chat as well. I think I'm going to hide the chat for myself just so that I'm not distracted by it, but I will be sharing this presentation with the group afterwards as well, definitely. A couple of things to cover. I think it's really important to dive into what makes it important to audit or validate a certain spreadsheet based on kind of the classification or the positioning that it has within a business. Looking at some best practices for modeling. What kind of basis are you reviewing a model on? What kinds of errors are we checking for? What kinds of things are we controlling? And a bit of an overview of what different kinds of software are out there to assist in the process. And then a pretty practical demonstration of a set of tools that can help potentially in the audit process as well of validating spreadsheets. So yeah, hopefully you guys are all on board. It's going to be quite a little bit technical. I'll try to keep it a bit general as well, but I think definitely from a project finance perspective as well, with a lot of these cost modeling projects, it's really crucial to think clearly, not just about how you get to certain results, but also how you validate them, how you just ensure that other users within a company are able to use the same kinds of tools that you're building and creating in Excel as well, and how you're able to have accountability in those audit processes to make sure that you're getting the most out of those models that you're building and using on kind of a daily basis. Maybe a bit of a a bit of a diving right into the depths with this matrix here. This is something that I picked up from one of the presentations from the European Spreadsheet Risk Interest Group 2 weeks ago. This is a very academic kind of overview of what different kinds of models there are in the workplace and the risks associated to them. So generally in practical business settings, we see 3 different kinds of use cases for models. That's down at the bottom here. We see models that are used for unique analysis. It sounds fancy. What this pretty much means is the Excel you open on your own desktop to quickly calculate something for yourself personally, to quickly run a pivot table on a data set or something to get a little bit more insight for yourself personally. Pretty much any personal use case you're using, any kind of personal analysis that's taking place that isn't directly impacting a decision or a business process. The second set is exactly those things that are involved in some form of business process. So you might be looking at like a profit and loss model, a financial planning tool, whatever it might be, something that's used with some form of frequency, but needs a significant level of control as well, because it's kind of going to be a baseline for some of the decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis as well from the business perspective. And then you've got spreadsheet applications, something that will be used by a larger group of users within a company, individual users that are inputting data and expecting some form of output. These are super crucial to control well, because end users are often not capable of making necessary changes or checks or validating the models along the way. So you can see kind of this green line that draws through the center here, which is for many companies, the expected amount of testing and checking done to a model to guarantee success for its use case within the business. So a personal tool needs very limited checking or testing. The 𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐢 ASM, this stands for an industry quality application spreadsheet model. And then you've got a planned application, something that's pushed out to a lot of different users that needs very strenuous testing and review. Above here in these yellow boxes, you also see situations where there's been too much testing or time investment in something that might not necessarily get the return on investment necessary within the company. And in the bottom right, you see areas where we really see risks pop up in businesses. Situations like these, like we call it a field expedient. It's a model that's being used in the business, but has limited testing, documentation, validation. These are those situations where you run into a spreadsheet and you're like, what is going on here? We have no control over where the data is coming from. There's no standardized tests built in, and we're relying on this information from a model that in the reality, a lot of people in the business don't necessarily trust or know how to use the model. Same thing with these accidental apps. Most spreadsheets in our experience in research show that at least 13 users are on average using every spreadsheet within a business. So if your colleague sees something over your shoulder and thinks, oh, that's a cool spreadsheet, I want to use that for my personal analysis, you say, fine, you send it to them, they send it to their colleague, they send it to their colleague. And by the time it comes to an actual decision-making process, the users don't actually know how the model was built, what kind of factors it was built on, or how to validate and check that the results are actually correct. Again, this was a fairly academic overview. I think a simpler way of looking at it is to try to just kind of divide these spreadsheets up into 3 different categories. Those are simple spreadsheets, things you're really only using for yourself. Again, a shopping list maybe, right? Your personal finance, your the way you tell yourself off for spending too much on food in the last month. Then you've got an end user computing device, which is those medium models, that kind of profit and loss overview, something that's used in a business process. It's being used to make decisions, maybe a valuation model where you're looking at a building project and saying, hey, how much is this going to cost us? And is it worth that? Those kinds of models have to be checked and tested at least to some degree. And then you've got structured models, things with connections to databases, things with standardized inputs, and these need to be checked and tested thoroughly. The process of checking these kinds of models also by hand costs an incredible amount of time. So it's important in that process as well to think about what kinds of people you involve and what kinds of tooling you involve. Just kind of reiterating that the amount of information or the amount of auditing needed or the amount of checking and testing needed varies significantly per different model type. And within companies, I'm sure people are running into and have ideas on all of these different kinds of models and examples of this happening in their own situations, in their own businesses. But I think on this right side as well, afterwards, I'll be sending out these notes. You can read a little bit more about kind of some of the checks you can build in, some of the tests you can do to guarantee that these models are producing the correct results for you in your own business practices. Again, if there's any questions at all, feel free to throw them in the chat, interrupt me. I know it's, I'm speeding through the information a little bit, but I think it's good that we're all in one page when we talk about models, that we realize that there are a ton of different kinds of spreadsheets. And so there are a ton of different reasons that you might want to check or audit a model. In some cases, there's business critical situations where you might be running into massive blunders that could be impacting your career, but also your business. And in other situations, maybe you're checking and testing too much for a model that maybe isn't that relevant. Let's move on ahead. Look at some best practices. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of FAST or 𝐸𝐸𝐸 in terms of just the general principles around Excel modeling. Maybe it'd be good if you could just throw in the chat if you've ever heard of these standards before, if you've ever followed them. But just a really quick, short introduction. 𝐸𝐸𝐸 is a set of 20 different principles that Excel modelers use to, great to hear that you've heard of the FAST standard. Yeah, the 𝐸𝐸𝐸 is a set of 20 general principles that really aim to encourage users to build good, kind of reliable models that are understandable for a ton of different users. These are not a set of rules that you have to follow step by step, but they are general principles that are really good, I think, guidelines for how you want to look at how you build up a model, how you make sure that it's understandable, followable. FAST goes a little bit further. It is really a set of standards. It's like a 50 or 60 page document with all kinds of information on tons of little subsets. Their main goal is simplicity. The acronym stands for flexible, appropriate, structured, and transparent. In our opinion, I think things like this 𝐸𝐸𝐸 is really, really helpful to just have some guidelines, general principles for Excel modeling so that you and your colleagues can be on the same page when it comes to the Excel modeling practice. Whereas things like FAST and general standards might go a little bit further in defining exactly how you handle a specific formula or situation. And it's good to take it with a grain of salt as well and understand that each business scenario is different. But the important thing is that you really do gear your models towards these general principles and practices. Looking at just a couple of general principles that come back in pretty much any kind of standardized model standards set, like 𝐸𝐸𝐸 and FAST both have these kind of core principles throughout. The first one is, I think, often overlooked for spreadsheets, and that is to build based on a goal. When you're opening Microsoft Excel on your desktop, if you don't know exactly what the outcome will be, then usually the outcome will not be what you want it to be, right? Like, it's really good to spend about 30% of the time that you're going to be spending modeling to consider and realize exactly what you want your output to be. What kind of information are you trying to extract from a data set? What is your expected output? Are you going to be exporting this somewhere? Are you going to be sending it to a colleague or to a friend? Are you going to be reusing this model? Those kinds of things are really crucial and important in how you set up the architecture of a model, where you kind of isolate your core inputs or calculations or your outputs. And it's just a really crucial part of the modeling process. The next thing is be consistent. We see tons of models in our daily practice with a range of, I don't know, 200-300 cells where suddenly randomly your formula changes halfway through, where somebody's like clicked and dragged the formula all the way down, and then randomly there's a hard-coded number or a different formula that breaks up this range of consistency. That makes models so incredibly hard to read. So being consistent is it's about formula usage. It's about the way that you name your worksheets. It's about the colors that you use, at least within one model. If you've got yellow cells as inputs, then all yellow cells really should be inputs, right? These kind of consistencies just really help make a model more readable. Next thing is keep it simple. I think that's a really core concept to Excel models. Once it becomes too complex, it's very hard to understand what's going on. It's hard to use. It's hard to audit and validate. And so, yeah, just general principles like keep a formula as short as possible, make sure that it's readable, keep your structure straightforward. Keeping it simple is always an advantage. Thinking about the next user is super important as well. Again, many spreadsheets are used by 13 or more users within a company. So it's really important to be thinking about how your team might respond to certain things in the model. Building in flexibility is incredibly valuable as well. If you're inserting rows or columns, there's new products joining, new costs, whatever it might be, your model should be able to withstand these changes in the business and these requirements of the model. And the last thing is one that I think a lot of Excel users miss, and that's documenting. I think the word scares a lot of people because they instantly think about the time that you spend or the information that you have to put in or following regulations. But sometimes documentation is as simple as a little table of contents. What does each worksheet do? And how do you expect someone using the model to use the model, right? Where are you putting your data if you're wanting to fill in new data? And where are you reading your output, right? As simple as that just makes the model so much more approachable, easier to understand, and easier to use. I saw a couple of people have responded that they see that they know the standards and stuff. That's really great. Again, if there are any questions in between, feel free to break it up with a message in the chat. But as long as I don't hear Thea interrupting me, I'm just going to continue. Based on these standards, here are a couple of risks or issues that you could find in different models. And these are things that are really hard to find by hand, right? They just cost a lot of time to review a model to manually be finding these issues. I'm sure you've all run into a situation where you had a circular reference where Excel says, hey, there's a circular reference, but then Excel also says, we can't tell you where it is, right? You click on the circular reference notification and then you can't find the actual cells involved in the circularity. Super frustrating, tons of iteration and testing to be able to eliminate these kinds of things. Also got things like risky formulas or inconsistent formulas where maybe you're using the wrong function for a certain use case, or you're not being consistent across a formula range. Hard-coded numbers and formulas, the bane of all professional modelers, I think. Yeah, it's crazy how often it happens that professional modelers are still putting hard-coded numbers in with dynamic references because they're impossible to update. It's really tough to validate where they're coming from. And just from a business perspective, they will stay there forever and no one will know what they mean. A ton of different things that you can be finding and looking for in models as well. Again, I'll be sending out this presentation and all the information to anybody that wants it afterwards, so you can read up on it a little bit more then. So audit software, the main core, like we're 15 minutes in, so we're getting to kind of the meat of what we wanted to talk about today. The core users that we see using audit software today is all across the business. I think the first area where we see a lot of use cases for these kinds of software are the Excel builders themselves, right? People building the Excel model, whether it's a cost model or a P&L, whatever it might be. The person actually setting up the model has a huge advantage when they're able to eliminate risks in the process. That every step of the process, you're able to build in checks or use software that helps you check your model and to eliminate risks as much as possible. You also see audit or validation teams. This is, I think, a smaller subset of people that that work in the business, but there are dedicated teams that are trying to help audit and validate that the outcomes of certain, whether it be models in Excel or general financial models, that the outcomes are correct. And then management, I think it's often difficult for managers to be able to trust the information that they're getting from their the members of their team. They're being pushed some sort of end total or expectation. I'm covering the slides in the bottom right corner. I can head over here maybe a little bit. There we go. I can talk from over in this corner. I think I will just cover it, and you can also read it afterwards. But for management, it's often a challenge to trust the logic behind an Excel model. They're being pushed just totals and numbers. And for management to just know that the models that are being used to make these decisions are correct is super crucial. And often audit software can provide things like an export or a stamp of approval, or at least proof that a review has taken place, right? Just really increases their ability to evaluate whether or not a model is correct. These are just a couple of different options that are on the market. Maybe some of you have heard of some of these tools, different pieces of audit software that are available to end users. They're at totally different price points by totally different developers and totally different, I think, goals. Again, it's just a subset. I think there's probably 20 or 30, excuse me, 20 or 30 more options that have not been listed here. But just a variety of different tools or options, often add-ins in Excel that can help end users to audit their models. Some of the challenges that we see. Oh, great to hear. 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞 is really good option for sure. Some of the challenges that we sometimes run into or that we hear that clients run into is that some of these tools can be quite complex to use. It can be quite difficult to get to the results that you want. Some of the models are incomplete as well, where a developer might have built one or two functionalities, but hasn't covered the entire audit process so that multiple packages are necessary to reach the conclusion or the valuation that you want. A lot of these packages also struggle with large models or have an issue with confidential data that end users don't want to evaluate, that a lot of users don't want to evaluate their models with those tools because they're sent off to a server somewhere. They need to sign NDAs or get approval from their IT teams. And why do we run into these issues? A lot of the tools were originally built by someone that was just programming in VBA, or they started on their own with the best intentions, but the software packages can feel a little clunky or incomplete. And it's often not the core business, right? A lot of these software packages arise because people are developing this on the side as they're doing either creating cost models or doing financial planning or investment banking, whatever it might be, that this kind of wasn't their core focus. I guess now to introduce us, we also create audit software, and that's what I'm going to take you through today, is kind of our approach to how we deal with risks and solving for issues within Excel models, how we handle this kind of audit process. We have 4 different tools, 4 different elements. On the top left, you see the Perfect Excel Risk Finder. That's really for controlling, validating, and eliminating risks as much as possible. The top right, you've got Perfect Excel Compare, the version management tool. This just takes 2 different versions of the model and we can see the differences. Then you've got Explore, a visual representation of a workbook to really think about that architecture, thinking about planning out how you want your model to look and trying to parse and understand complex Excel models as well. And then the highlighter, which just looks at some of those consistencies within the Excel workbook and gives you a little bit more context as to what's going on. And I think the easiest way to introduce you guys to what this process might look like is to just go ahead and share my screen and show you the software in action. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out in the meantime. I'm going to switch my screen share here to my second screen. Perfect. You can all see yourselves here as well in my little Zoom overview. Great. The first tool I want to start with is Perfect Excel Explore. Yeah, this is a live demonstration, so you can see how we see end users using our software on a day-to-day basis and how they try to automate certain steps in their audit process. Perfect Excel Explorer is a model visualization tool. So if I click and drag in an Excel model, then you'll see that within seconds, we're able to produce a visual representation of the model, which shows quite clearly in orange the different external references that are being called up. This might be a link to a different Excel file, a link to a database, some kind of Power Query, something like that. In blue, you'll see the different worksheets within an Excel model, and these arrows represent connections between the different models, between the different worksheets, sorry. Yeah, these connections can be through formulas, through tables, graphs, whatever it might be. There's tons of different ways that you can get data from point A to point B in a spreadsheet. But the general idea is that this tool helps you to understand how well, or not so well in many cases, the structure of your Excel is doing what you want it to do. In this case, I can see that there's some clear inputs up at the top. I've got things like this currency rates that are calling in some data from a query. I've got some overview sheets, some title and guidance. This calculation sheet seems to be doing a bulk of the work, doing some core calculations and things like that. And in the end, I have some kind of summary sheet that's summarizing or producing some sort of graph or end total or result. If I want to dive into any of these separate elements quickly to be able to see what's actually going on there, I can click on these arrows to open that specific worksheet in Excel itself. So it's also a quick way to navigate back to your Excel files to understand where certain elements are, where your data is coming from, where your core data processing is taking place, and where you can find your core outputs. Per worksheet, you're also able to see what kinds of objects are there. We've got 700 filled cells, some conditional format rules, some data validation rules, defined names, unique formulas. And again, just to pull it back to those kinds of general principles and ideas around Excel modeling that we started off with, this is a tool that really helps to understand whether or not a model is simple, whether or not it's easy to understand for another user, And it's something that really helps in the documentation process as well. Being able to export a visual representation of the spreadsheet allows you to talk about it in a much more clear way, I think, when you're talking to colleagues and saying, hey, the dashboard sheet is linked to the calculation sheet through these formulas. That's where we're calling that data from. And that's flowing into this cash flow, which is flowing back down into the summary. Just gives kind of this clear audit trail of where information is coming from and where your core processes are taking place. Bunch of different things you can see with the tool. You can also filter on input and output sheets to see clearly where the calculations are taking place, where your core inputs are, where your core outputs are. And you see on the left all kinds of different objects that you can find in an Excel file. So all your external sources listed in one place, the different defined names and how often they're being referenced, and things like the VBA modules as well, being able to read out exactly what's happening in code that might be impacting the sheet in some way. Are there any questions on this? Again, feel free to throw it in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer any questions on the software or the reasoning behind the software, anything of that nature. If not, then I will hop into the next tool, the risk finder. Again, when it comes to really auditing and looking at models with that critical eye, trying to understand where potential security flaws might be, potential risks or issues with the model. I'm going to go ahead and click in that same worksheet we looked at earlier. You now have kind of an overview of how complex that worksheet was. We've got several different worksheets, a lot of different unique formulas and stuff. What you get here is a matrix overview of the risks that were found, the weaknesses that were found in the observations in different categories. So we've got some issues with Excel errors, some issues with references that might not be built correctly, but some interruptions, issues with things like consistency, data issues, and they're split into these risks, which we think are potentially really impacting the outcome of a model, weaknesses where best practice might not be followed, and observations with things like hidden information that might be difficult to find on your own. Let's dive into a clear example. Everyone knows Excel errors. Unfortunately, href divided by 0, #NA, whatever it might be, lots of different errors you can have in Excel models. You get a little introduction on what Excel errors actually are and a couple of different references as to where we found Excel errors in the model as well. Go ahead and jump into this first example. You'll see a screenshot of the actual model. And if you click on that, you'll jump directly to that location as well. So just a really clear way to quickly be able to analyze what's going on in your actual workbook. You get the formula in question. So which formula is causing the issue? In this case, it's a hard-coded #ref, so it's never going to fill itself again. This is a big issue and could be negatively impacting the outcome of the model. And some text or some information on how you can go in and fix potential issues within the model as well. How can you... Hi, Tia.
We're starting to see some questions coming through. So I don't know if you want to quickly take a look at the chat and go over some of them, or we can also leave them for the end. But a few people have now submitted their questions.
Yeah, great. Jumping to the first unread. I see a lot of things about fast, and I see 𝐸𝐬. Great. Yeah, I saw Jamie asked if it works with robust models more than 50 megabyte Excel files. I'm not sure which tool you're talking about, if you're asking about this software or
I think this particular one.
Yeah, our software handles huge files. The highest ones that we've recorded so far have been close to 1 gigabyte with different massive databases built in and stuff. People do crazy stuff in Excel, but performance is really important to us. So being able to handle really, really complex files is part of our core business as well. Screen is too little to read. I'm not sure if I can zoom in further. Is there a way to do that from Zoom itself, that I could maybe just share the tool itself?
I can see it pretty well from my side.
I mean, I could try
maybe
sharing
if you
just
try
the
to
tool.
go full screen, that might help. I mean, feel free to let us know in the chat if anybody else is seeing things too small, but it does look okay from my perspective.
Okay, Does the tool help with traditional cell-by-cell review as well? Yeah, we're going to dive into a little bit more of the clear kind of cell-by-cell overview with the highlighter. Great, full screen's helping as well. And Attila is saying it's better to cover some of the questions at the end as well because it interrupts the flow. I can also understand that, but it does help me to know that people are actively involved in what I'm sharing as well, to see a little bit of comments coming back and forth. So I just appreciate the interaction, right? I love sitting in a room and seeing people's faces. I'm missing that a little bit now, but at least this way I can see that people are being involved. Yeah, diving back into it though, for every issue in the model, we try to present a potential solution as well. So you get a fix-it text that explains how you could potentially solve the issue in question and how you can go in and essentially repair the model. If there are questions as to why this is an error, why we consider something an error, you might be thinking, hey, this isn't a problem at all. There is a library available. And in the library, you see information on how we find the risks, what different kind of risks could be taking place, how we choose to classify it, if it's like a high level actual risk tag or if it seems a weakness, and how you can avoid these potential risks. For some other findings as well, things like a hard-coded numbering formula, for example, you'll also see which standards apply to this specific finding, so that if you're looking for some kind of academic backing for why this is an issue, then you're able to find that information here as well. And it directly links to things like those 𝐸𝐳𝐸𝐸 principles to be able to see things like, yeah, never embed in a formula anything that might be changed. Yeah, pretty clear insight there. In this case, it's pretty clear. It's definitely an issue. We've got a hash ref in a formula. It's not going to update itself. Hopefully I can just take the formula next to it, drag it over, and then the solution seems to have taken place. And I seem to no longer be having this specific issue. So that's great. I can also choose to mark this issue within the tool. That's part of the audit practice. So if I say, hey, this is acceptable because I fixed it, or maybe unacceptable because it was a huge issue, right? Somebody's missed some sort of big problem within the model. Let's grab some hard-coded numbers and formula. This is, again, one of those examples. If you do follow the standards, if you have some modeling experience, then probably you know that this is never the best solution to go in and hard-code stuff. But once again, you find it so often, and especially when you're working with client models or models from colleagues and things like that, having software that is able to just quickly filter through and find all of these hard codes makes it much easier to go in and update them with dynamic references and stuff. Another big example of issues we find in models is longer cell reference expected. In this case, I've got a formula, the sum of B22 to B24, and it refers to that range while data populates all of B22 to B25. Again, in text, a little bit hard to understand, but if I click on the screenshot, it should be pretty clear. I'm going to zoom in a little bit based on the tips I got in the chat as well. And then you should be able to see that here I've got a sum, which calculates indeed over B22 to B24, but this restaurant has been included, has not been included in the sum formula. So it looks like I'm missing some crucial data for my end total. And these kinds of issues happen so quickly. It seems like a stupid mistake when you look at it like this, like, oh, somebody's just not included the last row. But if you create a new row in a range that you recently referred to, this can automatically happen and your sum can be moved over. You could be referring to a big data range on a different sheet, whatever it might be. These kinds of issues really negatively impact the modeling experience, and having automated checks to be able to solve these kinds of issues is crucial, I think, to a professional auditor's life. Yeah, formulas interrupted by data is another example. We've got a big formula range here from C8 to N13, and it's interrupted once by a value at J10. If I click on this example, I can see indeed there is a formula that runs all the way across, and it runs down. But for some reason, there's one hard-coded 25,000 in the middle of my range. I would have never spotted this by myself. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I would have definitely never seen this. But it's still a little bit hard to read now, right? Because it's just one white cell in a group. That's why we've got things like the highlighter, which helps with what you were mentioning earlier. Yeah, I think definitely you can get a recording of this training at the end as well. I believe that Taya is recording it, and we'll put it on somewhere public.
That's correct. It will be available inside the community within the next 24 hours. And Joe will, hopefully share some of his slides so we can add this along with the recording as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got this highlighter, which looks more at a cell-by-cell basis. We've looked at some things for the model as a whole. At a cell-by-cell basis, sometimes it's just hard to see what's in a cell. So for example, here you can see where my formula cells are, where my single references are, and then also where anything that might be hard-coded or data is as well. These colors are changeable. So if I want this to be black instead, so it's completely unreadable, have no idea what I would want that, but it's possible. Just a quick and easy way to modify the visual elements. And this is a quick way to find these hard codes, for example. You can also filter on consistent formulas. This means that each unique formula gets a unique color, which means that also in ranges like this, where I've got one formula running halfway across the range and then changing, you can clearly see where issues might be taking place. And this tool just often reveals how a modeler also thinks about how they're setting stuff up, right? Like what we often see is that this row will be a different formula, this row will be a different formula, this row will be a different formula, and it just makes it really hard to read what's actually going on. So like limiting the amount of changes that you're making in a certain sheet really encourages users to be able to jump. Oh, for sure. I see some questions coming through. Just to finish my thought, I think this is a really good tool to reveal how an end user is thinking about how they're building up a worksheet. Is it simple? Is it straightforward? Are they being consistent across ranges? Just a really easy way to understand what's going on. Indeed, there's a question about the impact on the formatting. It absolutely never impacts the model's formatting. As soon as you hit clear, it's gone. And what actually happens behind the scenes, essentially, is that under conditional formatting, a temporary conditional format rule is built called the perfect Excel highlighter rule. So if ever there's some hidden formatting still over, you can go in there and clear it out really easily. But you just never run into that issue. And your source formatting is always consistently the same under. There's a bunch of different modes here as well. You can see where a certain cell is referencing to. Is it a different worksheet? Is it a completely different workbook? Is it referencing something within the worksheet itself? You can see input and output cells. Sorry, my throat is a little bit dry. Input and output cells, we can see that here there's no reference being made. Makes sense because it's a hard-coded number, but it is being used somewhere. In yellow, these cells are using some form of cell and are being used themselves as well. And sometimes end users will do things like make a quick sum analysis of a row, for example, just to quickly understand what's going on. Oops. Quick analysis of a row, just to understand for themselves what's going on. Then if I hit highlight, it is in blue, which means it's an output and it's never being used again in the model. It also means that if I come back to this sheet, I know that unless I'm actively using this in some kind of report, it is safe to remove this cell as well. Really cool. Bunch of different modes again. But in essence, what it does is it just gives you a little bit more information about what's happening behind the cells. Essentially, when you've got the sheet full of numbers, you really want to understand what structures are behind there, what kinds of formulas are in place, and how you can go about making sure that it's set up as optimally as possible. The last tool I wanted to briefly introduce is, don't save, the comparison tool. I think it should be relatively straightforward what this tool does. What it does is it grabs two different versions of a model. Go ahead and switch, compare this one with that one. Two different versions of a model, and it shows what's changed between the two different versions. This can be super important, especially when you're like updating a template, or when maybe there was an issue in version 3, but version 1 didn't have that issue. Being able to see really quickly what's changing as a model evolves is one of the core ways that you can increase the collaboration and also the auditing and validation process of models. We can see here in this little summary overview that there's been some insertions in the data, the formula, and the VBA code. Got some edits in data formula and structure, and some deletions here as well. These numbers don't say a lot to me right now. If I go to the worksheets overview, I can also see per sheet what's going on. In this case, title and guidance were inserted. They're new sheets. I can click on these arrows to jump directly to those sheets and see this new fancy inserted sheet in my new version of the model. I can also see that in calculation 2, there's been some changes, 2 insertions and 1 edit. I can jump straight to the first version. The second version, and then you're able to quickly jump to the different versions of the model as well, just to see what's actually changing. If I click on the sheet itself, I can also see exactly what's happened. So I can see some formulas were inserted here. If I want to see those formulas again, I can see them in version 2 or those cells in version 1 without the formula. Just really quick, clear ways to be able to see what's changing in the model. And here, for example, I can see this if error has been removed for some reason from the formula. I can see it again in version 1 with that if error portion, and in version 2 without. Got a couple questions here. If due to whatever reason the model size went up like a rocket, would you be able to see the source and shrink it? I mean, it depends on the reason that the model size went up. In most cases, you will be able to find it. In some cases, it's things like pixel pictures or stuff like that. That might be all over the model. In most cases, we're able to see exactly what's changed in the model. So then based on that, you will also be able to see what made the model size shoot up so much. But I think the Explore tool helps a lot with that as well, understanding which objects are present in the model and which could potentially be slowing down or increasing the complexity of the model. And then the other question was, does the compare tool also help with the comparison of input changes? Yeah, I've got some data changes in here, I think. Yeah, there's some data insertions. I've also got some data edits. If the input, so essentially the data that's feeding the model is changing, then you're able to see clearly in a cell-by-cell basis what the actual change was to the inputted values. So yeah, definitely we try to provide a clear overview of exactly what's changing in the model on all elements and in all facets. And once you're done, once you've reviewed all these changes, make sure they're okay, whatever it might be. Check the VBA module. A new module was added in this case. Check the code, make sure that it's not doing anything weird. In this case, I've got a little sub that deletes hidden defined names. Then I can export these findings back to Excel as well. We all love to be in Excel, of course. You get a little summary overview of what's actually changed in the model. Again, total number of differences, who made the last change, how many worksheets are there in which version, and then a details overview of the values in version 1 compared to the values in version 2. And then this overview, I mean, it's just a table in Excel, right? So you can modify it as you want, aggregate it, group it however you'd like, filter it, whatever it might be, and then use that as a form of version logging as well. What we encourage end users to do is just keep track of, in new versions, what's actually changing in the model, who's made the changes, and how they could potentially impact, the spreadsheet in this case. Again, as a really short overview, the 4 tools that we have to try to help users audit and validate models are the Explore tool, which help to visualize a model, show visually what's going on, help in that documentation phase or understanding an unfamiliar model. We've got the Risk Finder. Just running through them all. Speedy again. What the Risk Finder does is it finds, locates, and isolates different risks in the model and allows users to also leave behind a status, which can be included in reports at the end of the process as well. We've got the highlighter tool within Excel itself, which just shows really quickly and insightfully what kinds of formulas or issues are going on, just a visual insight into what potentially is going wrong with the model. And then at the end, the comparison tool, which is the last one I showed. So I won't open that again, but it just gives a clear overview of what's changing between different versions. And we hope and believe that with this set of tools, or really there are other good options out there, but with this kind of audit software, you hopefully really decrease the amount of time invested in a model audit process, and therefore encourage yourself to actually audit the models, because so many Excel files we see have massive blunders and mistakes which could have been avoided. But this hopefully massively reduces the amount of time invested to be able to check and control the models, and also encourages users to actually do checks, even in cases where they don't, even in cases where the end users don't necessarily have the time to go in and properly validate or check their models. I'm popping out of my screen share here so I can focus a little bit on some questions. It does work with the recent versions of Excel. The 3 standalone tools work with every version of Excel. So also before Office 365, you got Office 2009, 2011, whatever it might be, you can analyze them with the 3 standalone tools, so Explorer, Risk Finder, and the Compare tool. The highlighter only works in the more recent versions of Excel just due to the way that it's implemented. So that's from 2019 onwards. Good question, though. Very technical. You have tools for building financial models. That's a really good question. We do have training on following best practice when building and developing financial models. I'm curious, do you have like a specific example of a certain functionality that you might want to use for building a financial model, or what specifically you might be looking at, Jamie?
And you guys are also welcome to, if you want to turn on your video, unmute yourselves, you can jump on screen as well, if that's easier.
Yeah, sure.
In the meantime, if anybody else has questions, again, feel free to either drop them in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute yourself and you can speak up.
It's great to see so many people in the call as well.
It's such a great technology, Joe, that you guys have developed. Honestly, it's very, very impressive.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the core of the message is also, like, of course, I'm showing our software because that's the one that I'm most familiar with. But the core of the message is really, I think that we hope that end users really think really seriously when they're building spreadsheets, right? I think as this group is heading into or is already in project finance as well, with these cost estimation models for big industrial products or whatever it might be, I think taking the modeling, so the tooling aspect, seriously is just a core part of what makes someone successful at what they do, and being really diligent in every step of the process. So whether that's with our tools or some other tool, it's just really clear to understand that models are really important, and I think shouldn't be overlooked in the process of trying to get to that result or whatever it might be. Do we get a chance to explore the tool in a trial version? Yes, I think I haven't talked specifically to 𝐬𝐬 about it, but we'll definitely set up some sort of promotional option to try to get you guys some access to the tool in some way, shape, or form. I'll have a talk with 𝐬𝐬 maybe afterwards just to see exactly how we would push that out, but maybe we can send you guys an email afterwards with some kind of promotional option to be able to use the tools for a little bit. If not, and you want to chat with me personally, you can send me an email at joel@perfectexcel.com. That's just joel@perfectexcel.com. Then I'm more than happy to see what we can do for you. And yes, in terms of admin rights, you most likely will need admin rights. I understand that a lot of organizations restrict the installation process for things like this, but the big advantage of our tools is that they all run offline. So you shouldn't run into any of the privacy concerns. And if we have a chat with your IT team, I'm sure we can get it installed for you within, with no time. Within no time? The F1, F9 utilities macro. I haven't heard that name in a while. That's an old school throwback. I didn't specifically explain our cost structure in this call. I think that it's good to maybe chat about that on sort of a use-to-use basis. We'll probably do some form of promotion for PFI in general through 𝐬𝐬 again to make some kind of offer specifically around costs for you and the team. But in general, it's some form of licensing, and the costs really do vary. If it's being used for like educational purposes or as part of a training, there's a really different cost structure as compared to for a big company. Some of our bigger clients that use it, it looks really different for different use cases. I think to have a more in-depth understanding, the slides and recording will do more justice. Yeah, great to hear that. I think definitely the slides and being able to look back on the recording will help in that sense. It is also tough, I think, presenting on things like that without necessarily being able to see and interact with you guys. I don't know if I went too much in depth on certain elements or anything like that. But hopefully the core message came across that it's important to just take the process of working in Excel really seriously, to be building models that are not only understandable for yourself, but also your colleagues and clients. And that there are tools that can help along the way, right? You don't have to do it by yourself. Things like with now AI and stuff like that as well, there's a lot of options and possibilities coming into the space, and just understanding that it is important to make sure that it's not just the outcome that's correct, but also the steps to get to that outcome that are correct, I think is really the core of the message today. And that's one of the things that we really try to support our users in doing. But yeah, there's a lot of—
What is your actually perspective on AI and, or I shouldn't be asking this question. Like, do you think that at any point AI will be able to replace some of these processes, or it definitely we're years?
I think AI, even in its current form, can help users speed up some of these processes, right? Like if you're looking at which formula you're supposed to use for a certain situation, like say, hey, I want to look up these values from this range or this column, and I don't know which formula to use. AI is a great place to start and say, hey, which formula should I use, and then sketch the situation well. On the other hand, what we talked a lot about also at that conference 2 weeks ago is that there's an importance and real value in auditing those results as well. A lot of the tests that we've run with ChatGPT gave just incorrect formulas that didn't work in that case, and implementing those blindly will legitimately result in wrong end products and end results, right? So if you have the due diligence and you have the time to go in, place a formula, test it through, make sure it's giving the outcome that you expect, check it manually by hand to make sure that it's really adding up the correct way, then it is a great tool to save time in these processes. But I think we're still years away from it completely replacing some sort of human touch in the process as well, right? I think the skill to learn now is how to ask the right questions and how to confirm and control for yourself that the answers to those questions are actually what you're looking for. And just fully kind of hands-off, allowing an AI to do all the work is definitely a possibility for the future and a likelihood as well, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Good answer.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, yeah, if you guys have any additional questions, again, feel free to leave them in the chat. It's been a great presentation. We will be posting the recording in the community tomorrow, along with the slides. And if, yes, Joe can provide some promo codes or anything else we can share with our members, that would be great. And I think that's everything from our side for today.
Oh, I see that. Yeah, great to hear. I mean, your name is iPhone, so I'm not quite sure exactly how to respond to you in a personal way, but thanks for posting that in the chat. I think definitely, I mean, the big difference between us and some of the other options that are out there in the market is just the fact that this is all we do. This is really our core business, so we spend our times really optimizing this. You should see the developers. Like, I don't help develop the tools practically, but they are like working their butts off to make sure that everything works and feels good and looks good, but also things like indeed clicking and being able to go directly to the source, being able to generate actual screenshots of your model within the tool just really increases the connection you have between the tool and Excel itself, so that you don't feel like you're Thomas, if you could email me directly at joel@perfectexcel.com, then I'd be more than happy to give you a cost indication. Here we go. But I need a little bit of input as to like kind of the rough size of the company or the potential use case, and then I can pitch a number based on that, because it really just does, it varies massively. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that that you enjoyed the presentation. Is it 𝐦𝐬𝐢𝐚? Yeah, no problem at all. It's just I wanted to be able to respond to you personally. But yeah, thank you guys for interacting as well, for the feedback along the way. Excited to talk to you, some of you more personally as well. Hello.
Yeah, okay. At least since we've not had anybody that have spoken, since you started your presentation, I think it's better we should do that. And that is coming from me. First of all, it's a wonderful presentation. As a financial analyst, well, at least we're able to understand quite some things. Some of these things actually, there are new things coming up and developing, and most organizations try most of the time to showcase some of the software they can use for financial, modeling. And I think with time, we will get to understand more better, what you have, presented to us today, and hoping to get maybe the slides. And I'm used to Mark Bacchus of Corporate Finance Institute, so very familiar with that, and it has a lot of. I hope this Perfect Excel has the advanced Excel shortcuts, because you understand it's most of these shortcuts that are most important when you are doing your financial modeling, because they are very powerful, ways of making sure that your work is fast. Yeah. When you are preparing your financial modeling, so we thank you, we appreciate you, and then we also appreciate 𝐸𝐳𝐫𝐽𝐸 there, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. And yes, I will be in the community later today or tomorrow in case you have any additional questions. We will share Joel's email under the recording as well, if anybody wants to get in touch with him individually. And yes, thanks everybody for being here. Check out the upcoming events as well on the platform, and we will see you soon.
Ciao,
everybody.
Thanks for taking the time.
Bye-bye.